Mr. Carter for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for allowing me to wave on to this committee. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to speak about some recent rules that have been promulgated by Health and Human Services. I am a pharmacist by profession and deeply disturbed by the fact that now HHS is going to be requiring pharmacists to dispense medications that could result in an abortion, even though they may be morally or consciously objecting to this. I wanted to, first of all, let me say that I have a great respect for the pharmacist-patient relationship, and I know many of you are healthcare professionals, and I know that you have a great respect for the patient relationship that you have, and it's extremely important, particularly when you're talking about the most accessible healthcare professionals in America. 95% of all Americans live within 5 miles of a pharmacy. And yet here we have, as a result of this decision that's been made by the Supreme Court, we have HHS promulgating rules that's going to say that your civil rights have been violated if a pharmacist refuses to fill a prescription that they know is going to induce an abortion, and that they know that it's being used for that, even though they may morally or consciously object to that. In fact, when I was a member of the Georgia State Legislature, I passed legislation that said that a pharmacist could not be fired from a job if they morally objected to filling a prescription. You see, that's what we're trained in. We're trained to look for drug interactions. We're trained to take care of patients, including the unborn. And yet, the federal government is going to require us to go against that training and to do something that we object to morally or consciously. Not only that, but there may be state laws that directly contraindicate this. And we would be forced to make a decision between following a federal rule or following a state law. I want to ask you, Dr. Francis, I'll begin with you. I want to ask you, are the actions from the Biden administration adding to the confusion and the uncertainty that we see in the wake of the Dobbs decision?
Well, I think that there has been a lot of intentional spreading of misinformation about what physicians will and will not be able to do. And I would agree with some of the other panelists here that making women feel fearful that they are not going to be able to receive care that they desperately need in order to save their life.
That's not the question I ask you, with all due respect,
Sure.
ma'am. The question I ask you is, should pharmacists be forced to fill a prescription that they are morally or consciously object to?
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question. I'm sorry about that. No, absolutely not. And in fact, we have federal conscience protections in place because our federal government has long recognized that no healthcare professional should be forced to violate their conscience.
Doctor, thank you for that. Dr. Resnick, I wanted to ask you, in your written statement, you note that physicians have been placed in an impossible situation, trying to meet their ethical duties to place patient health and well-being first while attempting to comply with vague, restrictive, complex, and conflicting state laws that interfere in the practice of medicine and jeopardize the health of patients. When we get down to it, this is whether you're pro-abortion or anti-abortion. Whether you're pro-choice or whether you're pro-life, we're talking about the patient-pharmacist, the patient-doctor relationship here. And yet we're going to have the federal government requiring us to fill a prescription that we know is going to do harm to a patient, that we know that we're trained. That's what we do all day long, is look for drug interactions that might harm a patient.
Thanks, Congressman. So I'm glad you actually brought this up. We sought this clarification. And physicians, as you know, and as we've talked about before, collaborate on teams with pharmacists. We work very closely together. We have enormous appreciation for our pharmacy colleagues. There are already conscientious objection protections in place for individual physicians and individual pharmacists who are not comfortable with a particular procedure or a particular medication. But we also have policy at AMA that it's important for patients ultimately to be able to get the medications we prescribe. So there are ways for an individual pharmacist who may have those concerns to be able to refer
But
to
if
a
these
colleague.
rules are implemented by HHS, then we run the risk of civil rights violations
That's
here.
not my understanding of the rules. And we are seeing pharmacists who, again, I think are struggling with the same thing we're struggling with. I talk to pharmacy colleagues who are terrified that they're going to be prosecuted, who are comfortable dispensing those medications and are too scared to do so because they're scared of state laws coming back and prosecuting them.
Well, I'm out of
we
time,
want to work
but
together with our colleagues in pharmacy to be able to make sure
understood, but
patients get
I
their
just have to
medications.
say, I think this is a very slippery slope, and I'm telling you, this is dangerous here. When the federal government starts telling a pharmacist what prescriptions they're going to dispense and what prescriptions they're not going to dispense, and I'll yield back.